My name's Angelo, and welcome to Bad Takes, where Josh and I give you the worst takes in everything combat sports. How you doing, Josh?
Worst take, best take, whatever. Who's keeping tabs here, buddy? We got it. But let's go
I
ahead
will
and talk
keep tabs.
You will keep tabs. I know you
100%.
You know the last one, right? Our first show we ever did. I obviously got that one notch on that belt for us.
It was. We're gonna start putting up some polls, and we're gonna run this like a performance review plan.
We're gonna run this. It doesn't look like you've ran in years.
Okay,
right.
First of all, I don't appreciate that.
But let's go right into the bad take. All right, does the gym? What is it? The gym make the fighter? Or does the fighter make the gym? Is that what the question was?
That's the question. Yeah, we're in an era now. You know, UFC in the early days, there was no such thing as power gyms, right? Every fighter just came up where they were, and then the sport was built. Now we have power gyms. We have Extreme Couture. We have American Top Team. At one point in time, Jackson Wink was the power gym. We had, what's that gym in Canada with Faraz Sahabi?
The first power gym.
Pat Miletich, yeah, the very first power gym. That's right. So the question becomes, did the gym make those fighters, build them from scratch, turn them into who they are, or did the fighters make the gym? Right now, Fighting Nerds is like the next big thing. Kyle Barallo, Jean Silva. Fighting Nerds is the next big thing. I personally feel like they're getting a lot of like, great gym, Fighting Nerds, unbelievable. But they didn't build anybody. It was about 5 core people came together and they started that gym together, all of whom were already very good. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, your take, professional fighter, very long time, accomplished quite a bit. I don't want to gas you up, but it is what it is.
Keep it coming.
I know. That's the problem.
Pictures.
So were you going to be you no matter what the training was, or did the gym help you become who you are? Is it a hybrid? Like, does the fighter make the gym, or does the gym make the fighter?
So I think I want to take this on a completely separate way. I don't think it's the gym and the fighter. I think what it is relationships. My relationship with Bob Cook, my relationship with Javier Mendez developed into a relationship with them being my coach, my manager, and my trainer. It worked out perfectly. My relationship with Frank Shamrock, it was a love-hate relationship. I had loved training with him because he pushed me to brinks that I had never pushed myself before. But with him, he was an asshole. So it was one of those situations where I hated the fact that he was an asshole because he was so damn good. But then again, where else are you going to find someone who was the UFC champion multiple times over and undefeated in the UFC and all these other things, right? Where are we going to find a training partner like that? Him, along with Javier, who he was training Frank Shamrock as well. Maurice Smith was also training Frank Shamrock. Bob Cook was training side by side with Frank Shamrock, but also helped managing him and coaching him and all these other things. We had a good relationship within that gym. And then trickled in BJ Penn. BJ Penn came in, and now he was another one in there. We had Dave Velasquez. We had Kelly Delonte. And it just started kind of following itself in. You know, outside of Frank Shamrock and BJ Penn, then it was me that went into the UFC. So it was the 3 of us in the UFC all around that same time. Frank was kind of already removed, but he was the name of the UFC at the time, you know, being the 205-pound champion or 199-pound champion is what it was at that time. I think that it's the relationships that builds it. And it goes back to the Miletich camp. They all came from another area, but became fighters. They were fighters somewhere else, but then they all met up in Iowa. You know, we had Jens Pulver on my other podcast, and he came in. He's like, look, I came from Boise, Idaho, and just started training in Iowa, and it became this thing. You know, like all the guys were there, and he had a lot of guys. He was working with Pat Miletich, working with Robbie Lawler, working with Matt Hughes. These super gyms, I think, are built off of relationships. I don't think it's one coach as much as it is having the training partners you need to make you better. When Khabib came to AKA, I think a lot of it had to do with the relationships that we had that were already there. I had Gray Maynard there. I had Tyson Griffin there, had myself. We had Bob Cook, who was still kind of training here and there. I mean, you had Tomas Diange. We had some really good fighters in there that were our weight for Khabib to train with. And so that built a relationship. Then I started cornering Khabib, and then it just grew into this big thing. And Islam was there, Umar was there, and it just grew. Those were the relationships. And then as the coaches start to attach themselves to the fighters, then they build the relationship with the coach. And then you end up with this monster gym of just champions. And that's how it all developed.
So it's probably a weird environment where the OGs, the original crew, the gym did build them. And then once that core grows, other people are coming in. The gym didn't necessarily build those other people because of who they built originally, though. Everybody's able to get better.
Like, Frank Shamrock was already built. He'd already fought over in Shudo against Boss Rutan, and fought over there in Japan and Pancrase and all these other places, right? Then he came and he started training in San Jose at Javier Mendez with Javier. And then he became, UFC champion. Javier was new to the sport, not understanding exactly what was going on in those situations. Look, this is a sport. Like, this guy's a really good wrestler. When he fought Kevin Jackson, he's like, oh no, those guys always put their arms on the ground. I'm going to armbar him, no problem. Boom. 17 seconds in, armbar, whatever it was. They had worked with each other to make each other better. Frank was already an established fighter, but needed something. And what he needed was a coach to push him through hard cardio training and also give him a little bit of stand-up, enough to get him through to go along with his grappling. And that's what he did. BJ Penn came in, and what did he need? He didn't need the grappling. He was the grappling champion at the time, first American to ever win worlds in jiu-jitsu in Brazil.
In 5 years. He went from nothing to black belt in something nuts.
Yeah, just insane. Guy's dexterity, all those things. But what he didn't realize that he had, which he did probably realize, he had a lot of power in his hands. And he had the ability to go ahead, look, you can hit me, I'm going to hit you back, and we're going to see who can exchange punches with more power. That's really what it came down to. Javier gave him that stand up and the knees and all those things, and he had a good run in the UFC, and then he left and went and did his own thing, and then made himself back into the. I had already had 14 something like fights before I even went to AKA. I'd already had fights, so I was already kind of being made. But it was the chemistry and the relationship between Bob Cook, myself, and Frank Shamrock and all the other guys. And I didn't really start working with Javier until right before I got to the UFC in 2002, 2001.
So if we look at an example from this century and we talk about Israel Adesanya,
you fucking smart ass.
I waited till you were drinking too, so you had to just let it go. No, so
like the waitress that walks up, how's your food? You just stuffed a big piece of meat in your mouth. Lovely.
So the Israel Adesanya is a good example because obviously he accomplished what he accomplished. It's the second best middleweight of all time, right? I think we'd all agree, even with the steroids, Anderson Silva is the best middleweight. So if Israel Adesanya was not part of City Kickboxing and he just was at a smaller gym, didn't necessarily have that same coach and that same training, does he become who he became? Like, do you think City Kickboxing turned him into who he is? Or did he make them something? Because we wouldn't know who City Kickboxing is without Izzy. So I guess that's the question in that type modern example of a superstar.
See, I can't speak too much on that only because I don't know their relationship in depth. Like, I don't know if he came to City Kickboxing already having, 5 or 6 fights or 7 or 8 fights or whatever it was in kickboxing. I don't know that relationship. I don't know how much the coach over there was able to groom. I want to be careful using that word groom. Was able
he's old enough. Yeah.
Izzy, right? I don't know. I don't know how much of an influence he was. Like Javier Mendez and especially Bob Cook, and not to take anything away from Javier, but especially Bob Cook. He was there for me a lot. Like, we were roommates. He helped take care of me when I had no money to buy food for after training. Like, he would buy me food. Like, he took care of me. He was like another
beyond rounds.
Yeah, he was more like a father figure, to be honest. And Javier was as well. Javier took care of me as well. Bought me breakfast all the time when I couldn't afford stuff. Like, they took care of me. They helped get me to relax. And if I could quit my job because they didn't give me money, but they were, hey, you want to go eat breakfast? I was like, I got no money, man. They're like, yeah, I got you. Don't worry. So it was, they understood what I was going through, and they saw that I was putting in a lot of work. I don't know what that relationship is with Izzy and his coach. I don't know if that's where it developed and how it developed. So I can't speak too much on that. But I know like guys like Robbie Lawler, right? That went over to Pat Militich's. And then also too, guys like GSP, Rashad, they were at Greg Jackson's, but they had already had some fights. They didn't start there. Tito Ortiz was in the Huntington Beach area. He bounced around to a couple of gyms with the Huntington Beach gym that was there. He made, and then Quentin Jackson joined him over there, and Rico Rodriguez, Phil Baroni, they were all over there at that point and building up their relationships. And like I said, I don't know so much it's the gym. It really comes down to, there was moments where I wanted to leave AKA. But then when I went to Extreme Coutures and I went to Huntington Beach, down there to train, I went over to the East Coast and trained over with Frankie Yeager and those guys. My relationship with Frankie Yeager is fucking top notch. right? I still just text him randomly, like, hey man, how's the kids doing? How's the family doing? How are you? You know, this and that. That is one thing with him that, like, I could have seen myself moving out there and specifically training with him. I just couldn't do the East Coast. You're from Connecticut, you know, East Coast
I
sucks.
get it, man. I love
He's like, forget
like
it.
today's a snow. They canceled school last night because it was going to be a little cold today. That
Yeah,
never would have happened.
Never would have happened in Connecticut. But then also too, you get down into Albuquerque, New Mexico, and train. I couldn't see myself living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and training with Greg Jackson's. And I know they had a lot of really good. They had Diego Sanchez at the time. You know, I mean, they had a lot of good fighters that I could have tapped into and worked with. GSP, I believe, was there at the time. You know, Rashad was there. John Jones obviously was there. Like, a lot of good fighters that were there that I could have tapped into. It just wasn't me. Albuquerque was not my thing. I would have had to have stayed a California kid. I would have had to stay in Huntington Beach, which, why would I leave AKA for Huntington Beach when I know that I had all the best talent at the time, you know, there. We had Kane, we had DC, we had Luke, we had myself, we had Tyson Griffin, Gray Maynard, you know, Mike Swick, Josh Koscheck, John Fitch. We had so many guys, man, so many guys. And so the relationships is what kept me at that gym. In my relationships with Javier, my relationships with Bob Cook and our manager, Dwayne Zinkin and Bob Cook together. Those are the relationships, I think, is what makes the fighter. And when you make it comfortable, it's no different than when you go to your job. How comfortable are you at your job? Does it feel like a family? Does it feel like home? Do you don't not mind going to work? Like, sure, it's work. But look, if you're going to spend time at work, the people that are there, it makes it easier to go to work and go hit that clock and can check in and be like, okay, look, I'm here for 8 hours. Shit, you know, like, do my thing. It makes it easier. And it's all about the relationships.
So that makes sense. So it sounds like there's no clean answer, right? Because it's not necessarily this coach is a genius and he took these skills and he bestowed them upon this fighter and made that fighter great. Sounds like
the only ones that I can say something like that, AJ McKee, made and developed by his dad. His dad's gym, made and developed by his dad. I would say, you know, Joey Davis had wrestling, but Joey Davis was made and developed by Antonio McKee. Like, fighters like that, there's specific gyms that they went to that were, I can give them credit that it was the gym that did it, the coach that did it, and the gym that did it for that fighter. It's hard for me to, I would say probably Diego Sanchez was made and developed by Greg Jackson. You know, I mean, who else? I mean, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like, who else?
It sounds more of an iron sharpening iron type thing than it does building somebody up.
Absolutely.
Which makes sense. And I guess that's why those mega gyms, because we see rise and falls of gyms like TriStar MMA, George St. Pierre's there, greatest gym in the world. Now it's sort of, I don't want to say it's had a fall off.
GSP was also at John Danaher's in New York, was also at Hensel Gracie's in New York, was also at Albuquerque.
Jackson Wink. Yeah, he's bouncing around.
That's the one thing that GSP did. He was ahead of his time. He didn't settle. He used to train at Simon Fraser, grappling and wrestling at the college up there, which was one of the best freestyle college wrestlings in Canada. He would go there and train with all Olympians and try to get better at his wrestling. And look what happened with his career. It changed drastically after he learned how to wrestle at a high level.
He invented go ahead and wrestle a wrestler. What are you waiting for Josh Koscheck to shoot for? Just shoot on him. Yeah,
exactly. So, you know, look, that's my take on this, is that it comes down to relationships more so than a gym and a coach and a fighter.
That makes sense. Nope, that makes sense. Appreciate the view, guys. Like, subscribe, do all the things.